So I'm going to take a moment here and talk about why games as a service is wholly beneficial for most consumers. Now, I'm not going to do this without discussing the pitfalls, obviously, of games as a service. And I feel like this is important to talk about because with Nintendo Switch, at least according to Nintendo, it seems like their classic library of games is going to be handled in a games for a service type way. Now, it does suck, at least personally, that they're attaching this as well with Nintendo's online service because, well, I don't really agree that we should be paying for online, especially when the PC market and mobile devices are essentially allowing you to not have to pay to play online. But whatever, it is what PlayStation 4, Xbox is doing, and now what Switch is doing. It sucks that we're kind of having to accept it, but reality is it's so cheap that too many people are going to pay for it anyways that there's no point in really fighting against it. And I hate saying that. I usually don't say there's no point in fighting against the machine, but in this case, I really don't think there's a point. I don't think they're going to change no matter what. Now, that being said, I do want to talk about games as a service because obviously the classic library is going that way. We know about Game Pass with Xbox. We know that PlayStation Now is a service. Granted, they're more of a streaming service, whereas it appears, well, we know for sure on Xbox, obviously, you download the games. On Switch, we're not sure if it streams, downloads, or is both. I think both methods are welcome, but what we have to first off address is the elephant in the room, and that is the idea that people really want to own their games. And I understand that sentiment. And to that I say, go right ahead. There are so many ways to get your hands on these classic titles in an ownership type way. Some of these include the NES Classic and the SNES Classic, the Wii U Virtual Console, the 3DS Virtual Console, or, far be it from me to say, go to a used game shop and buy an NES, a SNES, a GameCube, an N64, and buy the games for yourself. Now, obviously, that can get a little pricey, and there are certain games, as an example, Turtles in Time for the SNES, that is very expensive and very hard to find, but it's a legal way to do it. Now, other people are going to argue you could just emulate it, and I guess you could do that as well. I don't agree with that because it's not legal, but whatever. You guys can do what you like. Reality is there's just so many ways to get your hands on this content in an ownership type way. Now, obviously on Switch, there are 0 ways to get your hands on an ownership type way unless it happens to be part of their Arcade Archives collection that they've been doing, where you can get things like the original Donkey Kong and stuff like that for $8 on the eShop. But here's my thing. All of that sounds fantastic, but I'm of mind that in 2018, just like it's very rare for you to see people buy movies anymore, I think we're going to reach a point where it's very rare that people buy games. And I say this because if you look at this service from Nintendo, this Nintendo Online service, let's set aside the online multiplayer aspect and just focus on the retro games. You potentially could gain access to the same amount of retro games over time that you have on current virtual consoles for only $20 per year. Think about that. That's what? A little over $1 per month that you gain access to all of the retro content compared to spending $8, $10, $15, $20 a pop for a single game. Now, again, you don't end up owning it, and you can only access the game while you're subscribed, and you can obviously only access the game as long as the service is available on that platform. But here's the thing. I think for a service like this, there's no reason for it not to just stay active on the platform. I'm going to give you an example. Xbox Live and PlayStation Network are both still active on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 because there's no reason for them not to be. That's the thing. What people forget is, yes, while we have seen networks get shut down on Wii, probably eventually on 3DS and Wii U as well, none of those networks were making Nintendo money. There's a continuous cash flow here happening now, and just like with the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, there's really no reason to shut down that cash flow unless we as consumers give them one. And the only way we're going to give them one is not enough of us are using it on that platform to justify supporting it. So here's the thing. So long as people own Switches and want to keep it going on Switch, it's going to exist. And by the time it gets to the point that it doesn't exist anymore, it's because nobody's really using the service. So at that point, it's probably time to upgrade to whatever system is current from Nintendo. Now, here's the thing. I've never been a big believer in Virtual Console. I don't know if that's come across in some of my videos, but I've never liked the Virtual Console model. I felt games were overpriced. Some of these games I could get even cheaper just buying OG copies at a game store. I mean, when it gets to the point that in the secondhand market I can get the games cheaper, why am I paying a premium to Nintendo for it? Because so they make the money on it? They've already made their money on this game. Sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times over. How many of you guys have bought, 8 copies of Ocarina of Time at this point? Especially if you include, the 3DS version and Master Quest and like zillions of copies out there of the digital copy, across 3DS and Wii U and Wii. It's like, how many of us have bought these games over and over and over again? Many of us have spent hundreds of dollars on a single video game just rebuying the same game. And this is why I've always been against the concept of what Virtual Console was. And that is a place where you buy individual games that you're just going to have to buy again in 5 years and buy again in 5 years. Like, here's the thing. A lot of people are acting like this is such a terrible thing that they're offering this as a service thing because, well, when the service stops, I don't have access to my games anymore. Well, guess what? When the new console comes out, you don't have access to your games anymore. You have to rebuy them yet again. This is what they've done every single generation with Virtual Console, and it's been my number one issue with it, is that they just keep making you rebuy the games again, and they have no reason to stop doing it. So instead of rebuying the games, what if you just paid the same fee every single year, all the time, and even when you get to new platforms, you just still have access to all the games? Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh! It's such a terrible thing! Like, this is so cheap that the only way I could see it possibly being an issue is if you're someone who does not have an internet connection. But let's be real, if you don't have an internet connection, how are you using Virtual Console anyways? How are you using the eShop anyways? You don't have internet, so it doesn't matter. Likely how this system's going to work is you're going to connect online and you're going to have to get this, you can pay for your $20 fee, and then you just have to do an online check once per week. That's what Xbox does. You download the games from a Game Pass, and then once per week, your system will remind you to connect online to make sure that you have an active account, and it just won't let you play until you do that online check. And for most of us, obviously, if you're listening to this, you're listening to it on the internet, so you have internet access, even if it's just through your phone. It's not that hard to tether your phone or run Wi-Fi off your phone to your device just to do an online check. So that's kind of the main gist of my argument, is that it is so cheap, so convenient, so affordable that this is really where gaming is going to be going. And I know people don't like hearing that because they like the idea of owning games. They like physical copies of games. But here's the thing. At least in Nintendo's case, we're talking about games that they're not offering you a physical copy of anyways. You have an ability to go get those physical copies right now. All the games that could potentially come to the eShop are available right now out in the world. You can go on eBay and go buy them right now. But you're not going to do that. Of course not. You want all your games on a single platform. And I hear you. And this is the best way to do it. This is the best way to create continuation. This is the best way to not price gouge your consumers. For all of the people saying they love Virtual Consoles so much, the OG way, I keep asking them, why? So you can buy the game for a fourth time? Why? The way Nintendo has done Virtual Console, why do you want that? Why wouldn't you want this, a continuous service that never ends, that transfers platform to platform, and all you have to do is pay the same amount of money every single year, a little over $1 per month? Is that too much for you? Is that too much to ask? Is that too much of an inconvenience? The only way this service ends up being somewhat bad in any sense of the word is if it requires you to be connected online to use it, i.e. you're streaming the games. If you are streaming the games, obviously that's going to require an online connection, and that could be troublesome, especially with a platform like Switch that you can take anywhere. But we don't know that right now. And based on how big these games are, I would assume they just let you download them like anything else. Now, let's address some of the other issues that people have with this service. Well, it only has NES games. Yes, for now. Nintendo has already talked at length about how SNES games are likely coming as well, and it's not going to stop there. They're going to keep adding more and more games the longer this service is out, and thus the service actually becomes a greater value prospect the longer it exists. Now, another thing to just toss out in the wind is that this service actually helps with indie titles. So in the past, Virtual Console has always been kind of sort of tied into the eShop, and it's very hard to separate the two because either you have a Virtual Console shop on its own or it's part of the eShop. Either way, you have a place where people are going to buy games that take them away from indie games. And you saw this all the time in the top-selling charts. It was always, oh, look, all Virtual Console games, and then maybe an indie game for like a couple days could crack the top 10. Instead, what we have seen on Switch is that indie games are selling there's just 250,000 copies of Hollow Knight sold on Switch alone. It might even be double that by now. And this would not be happening if Virtual Console games are on the eShop. You want to know why I know that? Look at the arcade archives and how long those games are staying in the top 10 and top 20 on the charts. And imagine instead of the arcade games, it was Super Mario Bros. 3. It was A Link to the Past. It was Metroid. It was Metroid Prime even from the GameCube. How many of those titles do you think would be dominating the charts? Absolutely all of them. Meaning that indie titles are not getting a fair shake on the eShop and again getting drowned out by Nintendo's classic library of games. Indie titles have no shot in the eShop if they have to compete against Nintendo's classic library. So long as Nintendo is separating that library into a subscription service, the eShop does not need to compete with itself. That's basically what Nintendo was doing. They were creating competition with itself, thus hampering the success of anyone else on their platform and thus discouraging them from releasing their best games. And thus, you end up getting less variety as a Switch owner. Is that what you really want? I don't think so. So this solution solves all of it. Now, I could argue that Nintendo should offer an ability for you to purchase these games after you've tried them. And maybe they will. They hinted at doing something like this last year. They haven't talked about it this year, so I assume they dropped the idea. But even then, why would you want to do that when you could just keep playing it for less than $1 a month? Like, why? Why would you want to buy it? You're not going to be able to transfer that ownership of that game onto the next system. Like, what's the point of... Anyways, let's address some other issues I've seen brought up in the comment section. So this bit of criticism comes from New Sunrise. He says, I guess this is one of those agree to disagree situations because I won't pay extra for a feature I bought with a game, which paying for online is. It is just too anti-consumer for my taste. Now, okay, that's a fair point. What does the classic games have to do with it? Well, let's get into it. He says, this is why I can't take a wait-and-see approach on this one. Besides, people were praising Nintendo with the Wii U for not making an online service. Now people can't wait to pay for it. Before, they were praising Nintendo for not using DLC and expansion passes. And look at where we currently are, with fans keep on giving Nintendo more and more wiggle room while abandoning any ideal they have held on to. I think Nintendo Prime will be right with his theory that Nintendo can become just as corrupt as the many other companies in the gaming industry. Some of us have to hold Nintendo on the consumer side instead of letting them do as they please to not let this corruption happen. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. There's one thing to talk about going down the bad way. Like, I feel like the Smash DLC is a bad method of doing things. DLC and expansion passes on their own are not wholly negative. We've been having expansion passes, expansion packs, and DLC in games dating back to the 90s. This isn't like a new concept. It's just new to console owners because PC people have gotten and praised this stuff over and over. We have a brand new expansion pack coming out this year for World of Warcraft, a game released in 2004. And you know what? The World of Warcraft fans are excited, because expansion packs and DLC are not always bad things. So that's the assumption you make, that all DLC and expansion packs are bad. That's not the case. I've always wanted Nintendo to do DLC and expansion packs, but I wanted them to do them right with substantial value-added content. And I don't feel like Nintendo has done that, at least in a fair pricing way, with some of their games. That was my criticism. Now, that being said, Nintendo still has a long ways to go to be just as corrupt as everyone else. I agree wholeheartedly in the not paying for online. And I don't even notice one Nintendo fan that has praised Nintendo for charging for online, except for the fact that it's cheaper than everybody else. That's been the only caveat is, well, at least it's not $60. Saying at least it's not $60 is not saying I like it. like that's not what that comment means. It just means, well, it could be worse is basically what they're saying. They're not saying that they want to pay at all. We'd all obviously rather not have to pay to access internet that we already have to pay for, or at least most of us have to pay for. But that's not how the world works. As much as I want to chastise Nintendo for it, and I have, there's nothing I can do about it. This is happening whether we want it to happen or not. What I care about is that when they are adding these games to the service, that they're adding them at an adequate pace and adding quality, and they go beyond what they've done before. If that's the case, this service will be worth it for the video games alone. I know it might... It sucks because I'm actually getting it so I can continue to play Splatoon 2 online, but it sucks that I even have to do that. Like, my stand is... to make a stand, as you suggest, New Sunrise, would be to tell myself, you know what, it's not worth $1 or something per month for me to continue to play games online. I want to make a moral stance here and lessen my enjoyment of video games. And unfortunately, I value my enjoyment of these games online too much to let $20 per year stand in the way. I value it too much to let $60 per year on other systems stand in my way. And that's the reality of the situation, is video games are such an expensive hobby that $60 a year even is not that much money in the grand scheme. That's why these companies get away with this stuff for charging online, is because ultimately we spend so much money on video games that $60 per year, most of which people drop down to $45 by getting deals online, is not that expensive at all. But I digress. Reality is that this is coming whether people want it to happen or not. And I feel like this, just like Netflix, started really pushing the door, not just on cable TV, but also on DVD, Blu-ray sales, and all that. I feel like we are looking at the precipice of the future, and for once, Nintendo's not necessarily super behind the ball on this. Xbox is already doing it. PlayStation's already doing it. This is Nintendo's current gen system. It took a year and a half, but now Nintendo's going to be doing it as well, and I think it's the correct move for Nintendo. I think it's going to upset some consumers that are used to the way things have always been, but I also feel like this is going to garner them more consumers and even more players of these games. Because remember, what this service ultimately does, at least right now, is... forget the online stuff. We all agree that paying for online is terrible, but for the games, what this ultimately does is make these video games more accessible at a cheaper price to more people. What this does is take a medium that is often too expensive to enjoy a wide breadth of it and making it more affordable for everyone. And that should be applauded. This is why Netflix took off, because Netflix made it so people could enjoy more shows and more movies than they ever could before, because they couldn't afford to do it. They couldn't afford to go to all the movies at the movie theater. They couldn't afford to go rent and buy all the movies out there. But what they could afford is a simple 1 month per payment thing to get access to thousands and thousands of movies. Are we going to end up with thousands and thousands of games through the service? We don't know. All we can do is hope this service grows and expands and adds SNES games and Wii and GameCube and N64 and all that glorious stuff, GBA, etc. All we can do is hope. It would be nice for Nintendo to come out and just make a firm stance that they are going to be adding all those, but I feel like they are trying to keep some of this stuff for a surprise so people get excited next year when they say, hey, now we're adding N64 games. It's like, oh man, big deal. Nintendo likes to hype things up in that way instead of just telling you right now that they plan to add everything. But that's just my 2 cents. Are they going to increase the price on it someday? I don't know, but let's chastise them for increasing the price when they do it. I'd rather not make presumptions. For all we know, Nintendo's going to be charging $20 a year ad infinitum for the next 100 years. Anyways, folks, I'm Nathaniel Robojans from Nintendo Prime, and if you like this video, you know what to do, and if you dislike the video, hit that dislike button. It's alright. I really want to hear all your counter arguments down in the comments below. I'm sure this video is going to get a ton of dislikes based on the title, but I just can't help it. Like, games as a service is something that makes video games more affordable. I know many of you care about ownership of your games, but you know what matters more than owning your games? Having the ability to play them in the first place, and this makes it cheaper and easier for more people to do it. Anyways, folks, I'll catch you guys in the next one.
Yes.